October 22nd, 1907, Manhattan. J.P. Morgan's private library. The mahogany doors close with a decisive thud. Outside, on the streets of Lower Manhattan, panic spreads like wildfire through the canyons of Wall Street. Inside this Renaissance palace of leather-bound books and priceless manuscripts, the air is thick with cigar smoke and desperation. A young Treasury clerk named Benjamin Strong stands in the corner, his fountain pen trembling as he takes notes he's been explicitly told will never see daylight. Around the massive oak table sit a dozen men in tailored suits, not elected officials, not government ministers, but private bankers. They control more wealth than most nations. And tonight, while the country teeters on the edge of financial apocalypse, these men are deciding the fate of America's entire banking system. Strong watches as J.P. Morgan, 70 years old with eyes like flint, pounds his fist on the table. "Gentlemen," Morgan growls, "the Treasury is out of gold. The government has conceded. We are the government now." In that moment, Strong realizes something that contradicts everything he learned in civics class, everything Americans believed about their democracy. The United States of America, for all its constitutional grandeur, was being ruled by a private banking cartel. And it had been for decades. John Halloran stands in his wheat field, staring at a letter from the First National Bank of Topeka. The interest rate on his farm loan has jumped from 8% to 18% in a single month. No explanation, no appeal, no choice but to pay or lose everything his family has built over 3 generations. He isn't alone. Across the prairies, from Nebraska to Oklahoma, farmers are receiving identical letters. The money supply is contracting. Banks are calling in loans. Crops rot in silos because there's no credit to ship them to market. Halloran doesn't know it, but his fate was sealed 6 months earlier in a private dining room in New York City, where a small group of bankers decided to restrict the flow of currency into agricultural regions. They needed capital for railroad speculation. The farmers would have to wait. The street is chaos incarnate. Telegraph wires crisscross above like spiderwebs, carrying messages that move millions in seconds. Men in bowler hats sprint between buildings clutching leather satchels. The smell of coal smoke and horse manure mingles with the salt breeze from the harbor. Inside the exchanges, the call money market, overnight loans between banks, swings wildly from 4% to 75% interest in a single afternoon. This is the heart of American finance, but it operates like a medieval kingdom. At the center of this kingdom sits an invisible throne, occupied not by one man, but by an interlocking network of banking houses, J.P. Morgan and Company, Kuhn, Loeb and Company, National City Bank, First National Bank. These institutions don't just lend money, they control who gets to borrow, who gets to survive, and who gets crushed. A young congressional aide named Carter Glass begins investigating. What he discovers makes his hands shake as he writes his report. The major banks share directors. Morgan sits on the board of 63 corporations. His partners sit on dozens more. When you map the connections, you see a web. Railroads connected to steel mills, connected to insurance companies, connected to newspapers, connected back to the banks. It's an empire hidden in plain sight. The clearinghouses, private associations of banks, decide which institutions receive emergency funds during panics and which don't. They operate like medieval guilds, with secret rules and no public accountability. If you cross the money trust, your bank fails. It's that simple. Journalist Ida Tarbell interviews a small-town banker from Ohio who speaks on condition of anonymity. "I needed $50,000 to cover withdrawals during the '93 panic," he tells her. "I went to New York. They told me the price was 20% interest plus a seat on my board for their man. I refused. They let my bank collapse. Bought the assets for pennies a week later." By 1907, 18 men control assets equivalent to the entire money supply of the United States. The Morgan Syndicate alone holds more than 40% of all railroad mileage. National City Bank handles more deposits than the next 50 banks combined. These aren't market outcomes. These are engineered monopolies, constructed through systematic leverage, manipulation of credit, and the weaponization of financial panics. And here's what chills Carter Glass as he compiles his evidence. It's all perfectly legal. There's no central bank, no federal oversight, no democratic control over the money supply. The Constitution gives Congress the power to coin money, but in practice, private banking syndicates decide whether America expands or contracts, prospers or starves. The United States, the great democratic experiment, has surrendered its financial sovereignty to a private cartel, and most Americans have no idea. Mary Breslin arrives at 7 in the morning. The bank doesn't open until 9, but already a crowd has gathered, 50 people, then 100, then 200. She hears fragments of conversation. Knickerbocker failed, reserves are gone, they're not opening the doors. By 8:30, the crowd has become a mob. Someone throws a brick. The bank's president appears at a second-story window, pleading for calm, but his words are drowned by shouting. Mary watches a man she recognizes, Mr. Patterson, who runs the dry goods store, weeping openly as he realizes his life savings are gone. This scene repeats in dozens of cities. Banks that were solvent on Monday morning are besieged by Wednesday afternoon. The mechanism is elegant and brutal. Rumors spread through financial networks. Depositors panic. Withdrawals exceed reserves. Banks close. Within days, institutions that have operated for decades simply cease to exist. But here's what Mary Breslin and millions like her don't understand. Many of these panics are engineered. A former Morgan partner, speaking decades later under oath during the Pujo Committee hearings, explains how it worked. When we needed to acquire a railroad or bank, we would restrict call money. We controlled enough institutions to make credit scarce. Interest rates would spike. The target would struggle. When they were sufficiently desperate, we would appear as saviors, offering capital at terms favorable to us. Senator Robert Owen, reading this testimony, feels physically ill. "You're describing financial warfare against American businesses," he says. The banker shrugs. "We called it efficient capital allocation." The media connection. The major financial newspapers, the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, are intimately connected to the banking houses. Reporters receive tips, leaks, and access in exchange for favorable coverage. During panics, these papers print precisely calibrated stories, alarming enough to move markets, but not so alarming as to trigger complete collapse. A journalist named Lincoln Steffens discovers that during the 1893 panic, Morgan's people fed stories to papers suggesting that certain banks were unsound. The rumors became self-fulfilling prophecies. The banks failed. Morgan bought their assets. They don't just report news, Steffens writes in his diary. They manufacture reality. The Panic of 1893. Full spectrum. The panic begins in February with the failure of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. By May, 500 banks have failed. By July, 15,000 businesses have closed. Unemployment reaches 20%. Workers in Chicago riot. Federal troops are called to suppress strikes. In the countryside, farmers like John Halloran face complete ruin. The money supply has contracted by 30%. Crop prices collapse. Foreclosures sweep the plains like a biblical plague. And in New York, the banking houses quietly consolidate their holdings. The silver question. Out of this misery rises a political movement that terrifies the money trust, the populists, who demand that America expand its money supply by coining silver alongside gold. On July 9, 1896, at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, a young Nebraska congressman named William Jennings Bryan delivers a speech that electrifies the nation. "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." The banking elite understands exactly what he means. If silver is monetized, their monopoly on credit creation ends. The money supply would expand beyond their control. Their power would dissipate. They mobilize millions to defeat Bryan in the presidential election. Mark Hanna, a Cleveland businessman and Morgan ally, tells a gathering of bankers, "There are two things that are important in politics. The first is money. I can't remember what the second is." Bryan loses. The gold standard remains. The money trust survives. But the public has awakened to a fundamental truth. Those who control the money supply control the nation. And in America, that control belongs to private banks, not the people. March 31st, 1895, Broad Street, Manhattan. A reporter named Samuel Hopkins watches J.P. Morgan stride down the center of Broad Street like Moses parting the Red Sea. Carriages stop. Men remove their hats. This isn't respect. It's something closer to fear. Morgan is 60 years old, barrel-chested, with a bulbous, diseased nose that he's deeply self-conscious about. But his eyes, cold, penetrating, utterly certain, make grown men confess their financial sins like children in a confessional booth. Hopkins is here to witness history. Morgan has been summoned to the Treasury Department. The United States government is out of gold. Without gold reserves, the nation will default on its obligations. The President, Grover Cleveland, has no choice but to beg a private citizen for help. Morgan arrives at the Treasury with his syndicate. Within hours, they arrange a loan of $65 million in gold to the U.S. government. The terms are favorable to Morgan. The government pays a premium. Morgan's syndicate makes millions. But more importantly, Morgan has demonstrated something profound. In a crisis, the American government doesn't rescue the banks. The banks rescue the government. The Morgan Syndicate. By 1901, Morgan controls an industrial empire unprecedented in human history. He orchestrates the merger that creates U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation. He dominates railroads, 63,000 miles of track, 40% of American railroad mileage. He controls insurance companies, electrical utilities, shipping lines, and coal mines. His partners sit on the boards of more than 300 corporations. When Morgan speaks, industries reorganize themselves. But what makes Morgan uniquely powerful isn't just his wealth, it's his role as the unofficial central banker of the United States. The Northern Pacific War. In May 1901, two rival groups of speculators, one led by Morgan, the other by railroad magnate E.H. Harriman, begin buying stock in the Northern Pacific Railroad. Neither will back down. Within days, Northern Pacific stock rises from $160 to over $1,000 per share. The battle threatens to crash the entire market. Brokers who have short-sold Northern Pacific stock face infinite losses. Some consider suicide. Morgan ends the crisis with a single dinner meeting. He summons Harriman. They negotiate a truce. The market stabilizes. Morgan emerges with control of the railroad. A senator watching from Washington writes in his diary, "We have witnessed a private citizen exercise more power over American commerce than the President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court combined." The Morgan dinners. Morgan conducts business at private dinners in his Madison Avenue mansion or aboard his yacht, the Corsair. No stenographers, no records, no public accountability. Attendees describe an atmosphere of almost religious solemnity. Morgan sits at the head of the table, saying little, his fierce eyes moving from face to face. When he asks a question, men worth millions stammer like schoolboys. Deals are made over brandy and cigars. Railroads merge, banks consolidate. Millions change hands based on Morgan's nod or frown. A partner describes the process. He didn't argue, he didn't persuade, he simply decided, And because he decided, it became real. The secret. What the public doesn't fully understand, what even most businessmen don't understand, is how Morgan's power actually works. It's not just wealth, it's position. Morgan controls the channels through which capital flows. If you need money for a railroad, you come to Morgan. If you need to issue bonds, you come to Morgan. If you're in trouble and need a bailout, you come to Morgan. He's created a system where he sits at every intersection. Every transaction runs through his network. And because he sees everything, he knows everything. Information is power, and Morgan has a monopoly on information. But the system has a flaw. It depends on Morgan personally. He's 70 years old in 1907. His health is failing. And in October of that year, when the greatest panic yet strikes, everyone realizes that America's entire financial stability rests on the shoulders of one aging man. It's a realization that will change everything. October 22nd, 1907. J.P. Morgan's Library, 10:47 p.m. Benjamin Strong stands against the wall, trying to make himself invisible. The room smells of leather, old books, and expensive tobacco. Across the table, men with combined wealth exceeding the GDP of most nations argue about which bank to save and which to let die. Outside, America is burning. The panic spreads. It started 2 weeks ago with the failure of a copper speculation scheme. The Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of New York's largest, had invested heavily. When the scheme collapsed, depositors panicked. On October 21st, Knickerbocker's doors didn't open. A crowd of 8,000 people gathered. Women wept. Men shouted. Police formed lines to prevent riots. By afternoon, Knickerbocker was finished. $68 million in deposits. Gone. The panic spreads like cholera. Trust companies across the city face runs. The stock market crashes, falling 50% in 3 weeks. Factories close. Railroads default. In Tennessee, a run on a small bank triggers a riot that kills 7 people. The government concedes. Treasury Secretary George Cartel arrives in New York with $25 million, all the government can spare. He goes directly to Morgan's office at 23 Wall Street. What happens next is witnessed by multiple people and will be confirmed in later congressional testimony. Cartel doesn't tell Morgan what to do. He asks Morgan what to do. Morgan, sitting in his red leather chair, studying a solitaire hand, doesn't look up. "Leave the money with me," he says. "I'll handle it." The Secretary of the Treasury, representative of the elected government of the United States, nods and leaves. Authority has been transferred. Morgan is now, functionally, the Central Bank of America, inside the library. Morgan has summoned the presidents of every major bank and trust company in New York. They sit around his table, in what can only be described as a trial. Morgan's lieutenant, George Perkins, presents the situation. Trust Company of America will fail by morning, unless it receives immediate support. If it fails, it will take 20 other institutions with it. "How much?" Morgan asks. "$25 million? Maybe more." Morgan looks around the table. "Gentlemen, you will provide it." A banker from National City Bank protests. "We don't have that kind of liquidity." Morgan's eyes lock onto him. The room goes silent. "You will provide it," Morgan repeats, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Or this city, and everything you own in it, will be ash by Friday." It's not a request. It's not even a command. It's a statement of physics, of inevitable consequences. The night stretches. Hours pass. Morgan moves between rooms, negotiating, threatening, cajoling. In one room, bank presidents argue about how to divide the burden. In another, trust company executives wait to learn their fates. In a third, Morgan sits alone, playing solitaire, occasionally summoning an individual for a private conversation. Benjamin Strong watches it all. He sees men worth tens of millions reduced to begging. He sees Morgan extract concessions. The forced merger of a broker he's had his eye on. The sale of a railroad at a favorable price. the replacement of executives who've annoyed him. This is the price of salvation. Morgan demands not just money, but power, the decision. At 3 in the morning, Morgan stands. His face is grey with exhaustion, but his voice carries absolute authority. "Here's what will happen," he announces. "You will each commit a share of support. The Trust Company of America will receive sufficient funds to open tomorrow. In exchange, certain reorganizations will occur. I have a list." He slides a piece of paper across the table. The bank presidents read it in silence. It's a map of consolidation, mergers, acquisitions, board changes. It's a reorganization of American finance, decided by private citizens in a private library. "Any objections?" Morgan asks. No one speaks. "Good. Sign here." By dawn, the crisis is contained. The Trust Company of America survives. The panic begins to recede. America has been saved, but the cost is profound. Every person in that room, everyone who learns what happened, understands the same terrible truth. In the hour of crisis, democracy was irrelevant. Congress was impotent. The president was helpless. America's financial destiny was decided by a handful of private bankers, with one man, unelected, unaccountable, acting as judge, jury, and emperor. The Republic for one long night ceased to exist. November 22nd, 1910. 10:15 p.m. Hoboken, New Jersey rail station. 6 men board a private rail car with the curtains drawn. They travel under assumed names. They carry no official documents. If anyone asks, they're going duck hunting. The truth is far more significant. These 6 men are about to design the Federal Reserve System, and they're doing it in absolute secrecy. The journey south. The train rolls through the darkness, heading to Jekyll Island, a private retreat off the coast of Georgia. The passengers are Senator Nelson Aldrich, chairman of the National Monetary Commission and father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr., Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, representing the Rockefeller interests, Henry Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company, Charles Norton, president of First National Bank of New York, Benjamin Strong, now a rising star in the Morgan Organization, Paul Warburg, a German-born banker with Kuhn, Loeb and Company, the man who conceived the entire plan. They are, collectively, 1/4 of the world's total wealth. Jekyll Island. The island is a paradise for the super-rich. The clubhouse sits amid live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The November air is warm, tinged with salt and magnolia. For 10 days, the 6 men work in complete isolation. No servants are allowed in the meeting room. They prepare their own coffee. Warburg, terrified of leaks, insists they use first names only. What they're designing is elegant and radical. A central banking system that appears public, but operates under private control. The blueprint. Warburg leads the design sessions. He's studied European central banks extensively. His proposal is sophisticated. Create 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, owned by private member banks. Establish a Federal Reserve Board in Washington to provide democratic oversight, but ensure the regional banks have real operational control. Give the system the power to create currency, set interest rates, and serve as lender of last resort. Most crucially, hide the private control behind public architecture. Americans won't accept a central bank, Warburg explains. They don't trust concentrated power, so we give them a federal system, regional distribution, democratic oversight. But the actual operations, the real power, remains with the banking community. Senator Aldrich nods appreciatively. A central bank in everything but name. Exactly. The debate. The 10 days aren't without conflict. Strong and Davison worry about the appearance of private control. Vanderlip wants more explicit protection for the major banks. Warburg insists on elegant design. The system must work economically, not just politically. They argue late into the nights, drawing diagrams, drafting language, revising structures. The room fills with cigar smoke and crumpled papers, but they share a common goal. Never again can America's financial system depend on a single man like Morgan. The power must be institutionalized, codified, made permanent, and it must be controlled by people who understand banking, which means bankers themselves, the cover-up. When they return to New York, the secrecy continues. The proposal is presented as Senator Aldrich's work, produced by the National Monetary Commission through extensive public research. The Jekyll Island meeting isn't mentioned. The 6 participants are sworn to silence. For years, even decades, they deny the meeting ever happened. But slowly, through memoirs and depositions, the truth emerges. In 1916, Frank Vanderlip writes about it obliquely. In 1930, Paul Warburg publishes a fuller account. By 1935, when Benjamin Strong is long dead, the complete story becomes public. America learns that its central banking system was designed in secret by the very banking cartel it was supposed to regulate. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913, sold to the public as a reform, as democratic control over finance, was actually written by and for the money trust. The conspiracy, it turns out, was real. Washington, D.C., 1912. The Peugeot Committee. Congressman Arsène Peugeot of Louisiana convenes hearings to investigate the money trust. For months, the most powerful bankers in America are summoned to testify under oath. The questioning is led by Samuel Untermeyer, a brilliant lawyer. He doesn't accuse, he simply asks questions and lets the answers damn the witnesses. Mr. Morgan, do you control National City Bank? I have influence. Do you control First National Bank? I have relationships. Mr. Morgan, you sit on the board of 47 corporations. Your partners sit on 118 more. Would you say this gives you control? Morgan, old and tired, his famous will finally cracking, admits, I prefer to call it influence. Mr. Morgan, isn't influence simply control by another name? The courtroom is silent. The report. The Peugeot Committee's final report is devastating. It documents in meticulous detail the interlocking directorates, the concentrated control, the systematic manipulation of credit. It shows how a small group of banking houses controls the financial destiny of the nation. The numbers are stark. 18 men control corporations with resources of $22.5 billion, more than the assessed value of all property in the 22 states west of the Mississippi River. The press calls it the money trust. The public is outraged. Reform is demanded. The Federal Reserve Act. On December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signs the Federal Reserve Act into law. It's sold as a solution to the money trust problem. Democratic control over banking, regional distribution of power, public accountability. But those who understand the Jekyll Island origins know the truth. The Federal Reserve is a compromise. It introduces some public oversight, some democratic or accountability. But the essential power, the power to create money, to set interest rates, to decide which institutions survive crises, remains largely in the hands of banking professionals. The regional Federal Reserve banks are owned by private member banks. The money trust hasn't been destroyed. It's been legitimized, modernized, given a federal charter. What changed? What didn't? In the years that follow, American finance does change. The wildcat banking of the 1800s ends. Panics become less frequent and less severe. The money supply becomes more elastic, more responsive to economic needs. But the fundamental question, who controls American finance, remains murky. The Federal Reserve is neither fully private nor fully public. It's a hybrid, a compromise between democratic accountability and banking expertise. The old Morgan partners and Rockefeller representatives don't disappear. They become Federal Reserve governors, regional bank presidents, advisory council members. The faces in the room change, but the hands on the levers remain similar. J.P. Morgan's death. On March 31st, 1913, 9 months before the Federal Reserve Act passes, J.P. Morgan dies in Rome. He's 75 years old. He spent the last months of his life being interrogated by the Pujo Committee, his empire exposed, his methods questioned. His funeral in New York is attended by thousands. The stock market closes in his honor. Presidents and kings send condolences, but his true legacy is complicated. He saved America from financial collapse multiple times. He also ruled it like a private kingdom. He was both hero and oligarch, savior and tyrant. The question he leaves behind haunts American democracy. Can a republic survive when private citizens wield more power than elected governments? The unresolved tension. A century later, that question remains. The Federal Reserve has evolved, become more transparent, more accountable, but it still operates with significant independence from democratic control. Its decisions shape the lives of millions, yet its deliberations remain largely opaque. The tension between expertise and democracy, between efficiency and accountability, between private power and public good, this tension is built into the foundations of American finance. In October 1907, in J.P. Morgan's private library, Benjamin Strong witnessed the night America lost its financial innocence. He saw democracy suspend itself, saw private power fill the vacuum left by public impotence. That night changed him. It changed everyone who understood what really happened. And in a sense, America has never fully recovered. The hidden empire didn't disappear. It evolved. It adapted. It survived. The secret banking cartel that controlled America before the Federal Reserve didn't die with the Fed's creation. It just learned to operate in daylight.